So I'm going to hand this one over to Oliver straight off the bat because we were going to be talking about this a week or a couple of weeks ago, but we didn't get round to it because we thought there were specific limitations in play that
Hmm.
would have stopped it being viable. But it turns out it was no problem at all. Oliver, take it away.
Yes, so last week Apple announced that emulators would be allowed to ship in their app stores, but it really wasn't clear what would be allowed. And initially, I
Yeah.
thought that the rules, and many others thought the rules stipulated very strong restrictions on content downloaded outside of the apps. So it seemed like it might be a good tool for official emulators. They specifically mentioned things like content offered outside the app had to be offered using in-app purchases and things like this. So it really didn't seem like you could just load like ROMs into them. But Apple is enforcing those rules differently from how they appear to be written, in my opinion, and third-party emulators are allowed. So first, a few days ago, an app called iGBA launched, which was pulled from the store a few hours after it launched, but not
Wow.
before I grabbed it, because another app developer claimed that it was using misappropriated code from their front end, unfortunately. And then an emulator launched from the same developer who had that misappropriated code, called Delta, which has support for NES, SNES, N64, Game Boy, Game Boy Color, Game Boy Advance, and Nintendo DS. So that's pretty awesome. And that's actually an emulator that's been available for a long time with side loading. So if you have a developer account, you can get it from like one of the so-called alt stores that offer games for people who can sideload games into their iOS devices. But it's not been available for the general public until now, but it is a very exciting development. So I tried out a bunch of games. I decided to try a bunch of Mario Kart games because that's what I tend to gravitate towards with emulators. So I started out with Mario Kart Super Circuit for GBA, one of my favorite GBA games. It ran very well. No visual issues, 60 FPS gameplay, looked good, ran well, perfect. It worked best with a slider style gamepad. So what I have here, like a slider style gamepad, feels really comfortable. But it also actually worked okay with the touch controls, which actually had haptic feedback as well. So when you tap the screen, you get a bit of a vibration. It actually feels
Oh,
like
cool.
a little bit better than you'd expect. Not great, but okay. And the core there is called Visual Boy Advance, which is like a very old, well-known GBA emulator. Okay, so that was good at least. But then I moved on to Mario Kart DS, which uses Melon DS as the core, and it had some issues. So that there are no options to increase the resolution of the rendering at all, which is odd. Usually, that's very common for Nintendo DS. Or options to display only the top or bottom screen, or to reconfigure their size at all.
Yeah.
So you just get like top and bottom on the left and right, which didn't look great. But other than those caveats, it worked pretty well. The frame rate wasn't perfectly smooth, though. I think it had some maybe minor frame pacing issues or another performance problem. Not perfect, and obviously with with a system as weak as the DS, you'd really hope to just have a really clean output there, and that's not what I was getting. And then, kind of worst of all, I tried Mario Kart 64, which did weirdly it ran at an increased resolution, but there were no options to change resolution, so you're kind of stuck with like a 2x scale. It looked like maybe.
Okay.
And it had some very obvious performance problems, which you might be able to see in the footage here. It had a lot of very incorrectly paced frames. When I panned the camera back and forth, it just did not look smooth at all. And it had issues displaying the track display in Mario Kart 64 as well, which I have some footage of here, which I think in the N64 is based off copying information from the frame buffer. Frequent pain point for emulators. And then, so in addition to all those problems, the buttons aren't remappable. And on one of the controllers I tried, because I'm a nut job who has like 10 of these, the start button was mapped to the RT trigger, which felt weird. So that's weird. So overall, basically, my summary of this is that I think Delta is not a great emulation front end, is my opinion. The GBA is good. The other cores I tried were not so good. I presume some stuff like the SNES, NES, those are probably good as well. But I think this is a great first step, and I think we're going to see better emulators, more refined emulators on iPhone soon. It's just the beginning, and like for someone who has not really used Android devices all that much for the past 14 years that I've been using an iPhone, this is a really, really cool development. I think this is really cool.
Okay. My question, Oliver, is a logistical one. How do you actually, because presumably these things aren't arriving with ROMs because that would be a massive copyright no-no. So what is the logistics of actually getting a ROM working on an iOS device?
So
How do you get the
logistics,
code onto it?
yeah, it's pretty simple. So you get the ROMs through whatever source you acquire your ROMs, dump it onto your system, and yeah,
That's good.
You need to get the ROMs. Obviously, once you have the ROMs, you can very simply either get those directly, download them onto the device, or load them onto the device, or like airdrop them from a Mac, that kind of thing.
Right.
Just get them onto the device in the downloads, which will be automatically, the files will be placed in the downloads folder. And then you just open the application up, just click load ROMs in the top right hand corner. And then it'll go to the download section. You can just click on the file. You don't need to unzip it or anything like that. It will automatically unzip it. If it's a zipped file or a compressed file, the device will handle that for you. It's actually very, very seamless. Very, very seamless. Very easy to load games onto the device for sure.
Okay. Because there was the fear that, Apple wouldn't allow copyrighted material to be imported, right? But that doesn't seem to have been an issue.
No, there's no issue at all. Like this is the real deal. And like for me, it's such a huge advancement because like I've had iPhones exclusively since 2010. And during that time, the only thing I've wanted really was emulators. The only thing that I felt like was lacking on the platform was the absence of emulators. I even bought a couple of Android phones just for their emulation capabilities, not to use as a phone, but just to run emulators on.
Emulate.
And now I can play those games on my platform of choice, just like everyone else, it seems. And iOS is like really good for gaming in so many other respects. And this is just another feather in the cap. So I think that we're going to see a lot of emulators. I've seen people talking about maybe, PSP, PPSSPP, maybe Dolphin coming down the line.
Dolphin would be sick.
Dolphin would be fantastic. Maybe who knows? Maybe even Yuzu or Suyu or whatever. I think Apple might get some ire for that one, so maybe not. But I'm really interested, really excited to see this advance. And yeah, it is super super easy to use. Basically, as brain dead simple as you could get. It's just a very simple and I think well optimized emulation experience. Now, the quality of the cores and how those are implemented. Maybe in this emulator, not so good, but in the future, I can totally see that being overcome. I don't think that's a fundamental issue. I think that's just like this relatively probably underdeveloped emulation front end.
Cool. So a qualified hurrah then.
Yeah, and I'm sure.
Yes, hurrah!
I think in the future, for sure, if more emulators come out, or if and when they come out, I think we could probably take a look at this in some more detail, because I think there's probably a lot of very interesting. Especially with the more advanced emulators, to see how those actually run on an iPhone. That would be very interesting to see.